Okay, so first slide there, as you can see on your screen, is a nice little screenshot of our dashboard, which I'm sure Barry will go into in a bit more detail later on. So from our side of things, a little bit about us. We were founded in 2007, so we're nearly 10 years old in our infancy, but we're already approaching 4,000 commercial customers as we speak. And I'll click on the slide in a minute to showcase some of those names, a lot of household names who actually use AlienVault, even though as on the slide, where the products that we have are designed and priced specifically kind of for the mid-market space, because the whole purpose that we set out to achieve as an organization is to not only expand upon the whole SIEM kind of messaging and what you would use that for, but also to make this technology, which traditionally, and anyone on the call will probably be aware of the commercial aspect of some of the more, higher end brands that are out there, like ArcSight and QRadar, tend to be very prohibitive in terms of the costs. So we're not ashamed to kind of look at that and say, commercially speaking, we can address those and make sure that in the current market space, compliance and cyber insurance and everything, that a lot of organizations can now get access to the same sort of level of technology that we've seen before. We're the only company to have been named Visionary, and that is 4 years running now in the Gartner SIEM Magic Quadrant. So we've got the backing from them, and you can see along the bottom there, I mean, that is just a handful of the awards and the stuff that we kind of pick up. You notice one of them is an SC Awards 2016 finalist. We actually won that, so it's 2 years running with SC Magazine as well. So we've got a lot of credibility in the market space, and we're heavily backed by some premier investors as well, to give, I suppose, you, the customer, the peace of mind that this technology is bought into and is performing very well. If I click through to the tried and tested customer slide, you'll notice obviously some big headline names on there, the likes of the BBC and NHS, Thomas Cook, some pretty decent case studies within that account set, because the technology that we actually have covers so many bases and expands upon much more than just SIEM. I mean, we talk there about being in the SIEM Magic Quadrant, but really what AlienVault is now is about USM, and you'll probably hear the term USM come up more and more, Unified Security Management, because it's about not just about collecting the events and looking at security information, it's about what else you can do with that knowledge, what else you can do with that information, and then how you can remediate or mitigate against any threats that come about, which is why it's a much more kind of unified approach to helping support on your network environment. So from there, we'll start talking about the hacking side of things. I think it's probably an opportune moment to pass over to Barry. Barry, you okay carrying forward from here?
Yeah, sure, Neil. Yeah. So, yeah, basically, guys, in terms of what we've seen so far here in AlienVault, of course, hackers themselves use quite sophisticated tool sets, as you'd imagine. And our pedigree with AlienVault is that we're actually using those very same tool sets on the good side of defense, of course. So traditional technology like deep packet inspection, various other types of attack vectors that use these technologies, that's exactly what we're doing with AlienVault ourselves in our labs team. So in the past year alone, we've seen everything from ransomware infections, CryptoLocker reaching an epidemic level in the US. And of course, as we look at Europe, we're seeing this dramatic increase also in the ransomware infections. In AlienVault, we're actually able to track these hackers and activity through a technology which we'll see in our demonstration known as Open Threat Exchange, and share that information back with our end users of Unified Security Management. Now, in terms of what we're looking at in tracking within our AlienVault Labs team, with over $1 trillion in intellectual property worldwide stolen, there was more increase and advancement in how this theft is occurring. Quite simply, originally, it probably would have started with simple case of social engineering, where they're actually jumping on calls, trying to get as much information from the organization, all the way through to actual infection now, which provides the hacker with data exfiltration capability. Simply clicking on an email with an asset that is vulnerable can execute code within your own desktop, laptop, or server, for example, and that code will then go ahead and perform that exfiltration. So these are the kind of events that we're tracking globally here in AlienVault. And as a global organization, we're feeding that information and intelligence back to our end user base. So back over to you, Neil, there. Yep.
Thanks, Barry. So, yeah, we mentioned right at the top of the slide the cost prohibitiveness of SIEM itself. And itself is quite a complex and expensive kind of process. It's not just about, mostly you'll have experienced this yourselves, I'm sure. It's not just about the initial licensing cost itself. It's about then how you can go about implementation, how you can go about then setting up the policies and managing those kind of technologies, which are quite high level, and then the ongoing management costs and the ability to then assign the kind of resource that's required to collate the data and to be able to offer your own remediation internally, and how you kind of go about that becomes an extremely kind of costly exercise. And there's a real cost of security. I mean, it's a bit outdated now, but spending a lot of money, and it's about that real world cost. And if you look at then how the market is moving itself in terms of compliance, which kicks in from 2017, and everybody needing to get on the cyber insurance bandwagon. And what perhaps we don't know at the moment is that cyber insurance comes at a cost, and that's fine. And it is where it is at the moment. Relatively speaking, I guess we could say it was low. But what happened then past 2017 when the claims start kicking in? I think there's probably a little bit of a fear factor at the moment around claiming against cyber insurance. And when that starts to kick in, when claims start to go, just like anyone will have experienced with any car insurance or home insurance, the premium will then kick up. And what we're able to do is mitigate against those costs and bring real-world cost savings via an affordable solution to market trends that are there's an inevitability about it. So I think we're in a very privileged position to be able to offer solutions to these real-world problems with real-world cost association and be able to do it via a highly cost-effective kind of platform. So with the likes of ANSecurity partnering, they'll be able to offer the expertise to be able to make it also very cost-effective to run and manage the solution itself, and then to push from there to make sure that your business is extremely well protected. You're very well covered in terms of all of the different facets of AlienVault as a technology. So Barry, do you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, that's exactly the point there, Neil. For our end users, it's all about the cost associated with traditional security stacks and tool sets. So some background on myself, I would have actually provided audits for end users previously, and what I always would have used was a pretty complex stack, to be fair. We'd usually integrate with various different technologies to produce a report for an organization. Now with AlienVault, what we're saying is that, of course, that knowledge, we can now integrate that with a stack that can be deployed on-premise for your own organization. And of course, you now benefit from the AlienVault Labs knowledge and that very same tool set under a support subscription, of course, from AlienVault, ensuring that it is consistently updated. So from our perspective, of course, being able to prevent attacks, etc., we've seen that as a strategy where, yeah, it does a good job. Prevention does do a certain level of blocking, etc. But in terms of a whole bigger picture, a holistic approach to security, detection has become a key element because it's behavior of an attack scenario. And that's sophisticated knowledge that we're delivering for our end users. So we'll see in the demonstration how we actually deploy that in their environment. But essentially, understanding that from the very beginning is key with AlienVault. Back over to you, Neil.
So yeah, we'll look at, I mentioned right at the start again about SIEM versus USM now. And the reason we're calling it USM and not just SIEM is because SIEM is only one pillar of the 5. I'm sure this sort of information is something that's maybe already well known to many people on this particular call, but it's really about expanding upon what SIEM actually offers itself. So these are the 5 pillars. I'll pass over to Barry in a bit more detail in a moment about what this all means and how this all integrates. But primarily speaking, we're talking about SIEM and the log management side, and this all comes in from the OTX threat data. Now, OTX, another little acronym there for you, is the Open Threat Exchange. And this is based on AlienVault being an open source product at its inception, and having built then, as a result, a community of, I think we're in the region of 40,000 contributors now worldwide to the Open Threat Exchange. And all that is a load of people out there feeding data into a central repository, which then in itself updates our labs team. And our labs team are actually people with eyes on these screens, mitigating them and realizing what these risks actually are, and then pushing out that validated data. 4 times, I think we're 4 times a week we update now the central server that will be in your AlienVault implementation, and that would update the solution itself that you've got on premise, therefore being hugely up to date. I think, Barry, you may have some examples of how, how clever this technology is and the kind of threats it kind of can recognize and prevent, well, not prevent, I should say, but make the networks aware of. And then that in itself lends itself hugely well to then incident response, because you're able to know about these incidents even before some of them are appearing in country via geos and so on. But more about the product itself lends itself towards asset discovery, and we're able to do active and passive network scanning. We can also check around asset inventory and software inventory, so we can even read and understand what software versions you're running throughout the network. Which then, and it goes around a nice little circle there onto the vulnerability assessment, so it's continuous vulnerability monitoring, always looking at any potential breaches in your network. So the remediation, which is always part of this, let's never forget, becomes a lot simpler when the information passed to you is so valid and so fast. We can also then, as part of the vulnerability, look at the intrusion detect work, which is both intrusion detection across the network, both network IDS and host IDS, and then also monitor behaviors as well via the kind of policy management engine, all set up via the central GUI. Barry, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's it exactly. So what we'll do now is we'll jump into a bit more detail around each one of these components. And as mentioned, for AlienVault here, it really is essential that we understand these capabilities. In terms of what we do in the tool set, what we're actually unifying here are the core pillars to identify threat activity. From there, we reach out, and we'll see in a moment how we go to our cloud threat intelligence, the Open Threat Exchange. But these 5 modules are essential, and what we then provide is what is known as cross-correlation. Think of a crime scene where you've got multiple pieces of evidence, stitch them together with a very expensive forensic analysis, of course, and then, of course, basically remediate. So we look at the event, we look at the evidence, and we basically analyze it for end users. Now, previously, that knowledge has been the remit of course, as we're all aware of, deep security knowledge, etc. And what we're saying now is with AlienVault, we're here to complement that knowledge and, of course, make it much easier for the organization to gain that visibility. So, let's go into a bit more detail around these core capabilities. So for most organizations today, with our first capability, asset discovery, what we find is that companies of all sizes today, even some of the very large ones, they would have some form of existing asset and inventory tool set, but it has not been used in the context of security. So from asset discovery's perspective, what we're looking at in AlienVault is basically what is the type of asset. Is it a server, a desktop, a firewall, and what is the scope and risk level of that asset? For the organization, asset discovery is automated in AlienVault. Ease of use is one of our key capabilities also. Once we have finished asset discovery, we're then going to scan that same asset inventory for vulnerabilities and then provide continuous assessment for the organization of any detected vulnerabilities associated with those assets. Now, this means if you have a systems management team in your organization today, they quite simply may align their patch management schedule with something like Microsoft Patch Tuesday, as we all know. And if for whatever reason one of those servers slips and just does not get patched, then of course that could potentially lead to an attack vector. That means we would target one of those vulnerabilities, of course. So from vulnerabilities assessment, it's giving you the insight, the visibility into your organization's current risk level associated with vulnerabilities, and then going into actual continuous monitoring. Today, we offer, of course, remediation verification, which means we do a baseline scan initially, and then a differential analysis, so just compare and contrast against the previous report. Your third capability, IDS, moves us into the real remit of intrusion detection. IDS traditionally has run at the edge and used a spam port on your network, which is basically tapping all the traffic flow. With the same network tap, we're able to take a look for signatures which indicate suspicious payload. For example, imagine that my own desktop here gets compromised by malware, and that malware starts to encrypt information and send it out from the asset itself. Well, using NIDS signatures, we can detect that exact behavior, known as data exfiltration. With host-level IDS, we also include an agent in AlienVault, and this agent allows us to monitor files and folders. So if you're doing an auditing project, for example, you're now able to report on suspicious activity related to changes with file sets, and of course, any activity on the servers themselves. As we move then into behavioral monitoring and SIEM, of course, this brings us to the forefront of security today. Behavioral monitoring used to traditionally apply to just simple use of the network within the customer environment. Regardless of the size of the organization, just a small organization all the way up to a telco, for example, behavioral monitoring indicated spikes in traffic flow that indicated anomalies. Today, in today's environment, of course, with cloud infrastructure and various other components, behavioral monitoring now extends that capability to the smaller organization and gives you the exact same level of detection. Net flow analysis allows us to analyze that network flow itself, and service availability monitoring indicates when assets go offline, for example. SIEM then, of course, AlienVault USM is a leader in the SIEM quadrant there, and in terms of our capability, what we're also classed there around visionary is basically because of our capability related to how we react to the information. Now, SIEM, for any end user who is new to that terminology, incident and event management. So what incident has occurred, and what are we doing in AlienVault to assist the organization in remediating the incident? With AlienVault USM, we offer a complete ease of deployment with our SIEM technology. We have a virtual OVF file, which runs on VMware ESXi, or a physical appliance option. With the SIEM layer, we'll see how tickets are raised automatically when a security incident occurs. Alarms are raised when the event is witnessed, and simultaneously email alerts are sent out. Log management allows the organization to retain logs for a certain retention period. So, for example, 12 months, maybe through to 2 to 3 years, and longer within the financial industry. So there are 5 core capabilities which we're going to see in today's live environment. Okay, so if there's no other questions there, we would like to move to the demonstration where we can showcase an actual existing client-side attack vector scenario.
Oh, sorry, Barry, have you unshared your screen, or because nothing's come up?
There we go. Can everybody see this okay?
Yeah,
yep.
Perfect.
Apologies, the line seemed to drop there for a moment.
No problem.
Excellent. Okay, guys, so for today's session, we are going to focus on what is known as a client-side attack vector. In our scenario, in AlienVault USM, we're seeing a dramatic increase in security incidents occurring within the organization, and AlienVault is simultaneously raising alarms and sending tickets to the relevant admin contact. In terms of the security events, all information within AlienVault USM is being captured and retained on our USM logger for later forensics analysis. However, for today's session, we're going to go straight to how AlienVault detects suspicious activity. Using intrusion detection capability, AlienVault is raising alarms based on the simple fact that we have identified one of the assets in our organization with vulnerable software currently on that asset. As we can see, we have detected that there is a version of a Java plugin running on one of our end users' assets. With the same Java plugin, we reveal all information related to the source and destination, IP addresses, where our end user has communicated with the website. Now, effectively speaking, just at this very early stage of environmental awareness, most organizations today would not actually be aware of this level of attack vector. Quite simply, with vulnerable Java versions running in your Internet Explorer or maybe various other platforms, that can actually lead to an attack vector known as a phishing campaign. Now, as mentioned, phishing campaigns and client-side attack vectors are today something that we're seeing as a global epidemic level in terms of the ransomware, effectiveness, etc., simply by clicking on emails and the hackers staying on top of the latest vulnerabilities, they are able to compromise the asset. So with environmental awareness, what we are telling your organization is right now we have a policy violation, which means that this vulnerable version of Java needs to be either removed from the asset or, of course, we will go ahead and patch and update the asset. For the organization, that has now been included in our report later on, which we'll see known as our Business and Compliance Report module. So as we continue through AlienVault USM in this lab environment, what we are showing is basically how we're going from that simple environmental awareness through to the actual sophisticated attack vector itself. As we move from that client-side vulnerability attack detection, we see how basically the end user itself, on the edge of their network, they are already being scanned in relation to their ports and services on the DMZ infrastructure. So this is where you would have your firewalls located, and of course, in this case, AlienVault USM has discovered that an attacker is trying to map out the IP addresses for this organization's firewall. As we jump across to the Open Threat Exchange, we're sharing all knowledge related to that IP address. In addition, threat findings from AlienVault on the Open Threat Exchange indicate that this host is actively scanning other additional assets globally. So by being able to track IP addresses, share on the threat intelligence content itself, we're now able to produce that alarm in AlienVault USM and give you the visibility that you are being targeted. Returning to our AlienVault USM internally, what we can now see is that we have the client-side software, we have port scanning activity on the DMZ, and what happens is that we're actually undergoing that phishing campaign attack scenario. So delivery and attack patterns in AlienVault relate directly to the type of activity that the hacker is using in order to target your organization. With AlienVault Labs knowledge, we are identifying the exploit kit that is being used, and we are raising the alarm based around that exploit kit. In this example, the Neutrino EK exploit kit has been used, and this means our internal asset, one of our own assets in the organization, has communicated with the website hosting that exploit kit. This is a severe level alarm, and AlienVault's automated threat intelligence and action engine, in terms of cross-correlation, has raised the risk level here and flagged this as severe. In the worst case scenario for the internal department and of course the IT team, etc., you are now gaining the visibility into the attack vector itself, which later leads us to our reporting module. Now for compliance, etc., of course, it does indicate it now that at this point in time we have captured the IP addressing, we know the attack vector, and so therefore we're giving back that visibility. Traditionally, of course, this was the remit of those expensive deployments mentioned in the presentation today. So now we go from that actual delivery and attack of the exploit kit itself through to the final event, which is, unfortunately for this organization, full system compromise. Now, in this scenario, the asset is not only compromised, but it is also communicating with additional suspicious activity. So basically here, we're able to flag that activity. We can see quite easily how additional trojans have been delivered to the asset itself. As that trojan communicates with other websites, AlienVault again raising the risk level in the organization and reporting on that activity. So today we provide you with that full IDS capability, going from that simple environmental awareness activity, so what versions of Java, Adobe Flash, and what versions of software in our organization are vulnerable, all the way through to that full system compromise event and detection. With AlienVault today, we provide you with all of the threat intelligence required to analyze the event also. So as we see these alarms being raised, simultaneously, tickets are being opened in AlienVault USM, giving you the knowledge about the actual event itself. In terms of those events, as a security engineer, of course, I would look through this and actually go ahead and remediate the asset, potentially removing the actual asset from the network, or at least at a minimum, raising awareness for the systems management team. In terms of the IP addresses that we've communicated with, the security team is receiving all information related to the communication stream, and therefore they are able to quite quickly jump to the firewall log files, for example, and verify, analyze, cross-correlate, and confirm that indeed that asset has communicated with that known malicious IP address previously. So therefore, with AlienVault USM, not only are you receiving real-time threat intelligence, but we do include that SIEM capability, allowing you to historically track back on the threat intelligence information. To preempt the attack vector in this demonstration today as a security team with AlienVault USM in place, quite simply, we would already have received the event indicating that our ASA was picking up on IP addresses on a blacklist, and we had then gone to the environmental awareness level of activity. So we would have actually had enough information right there to go ahead and actually preempt that full system compromise event. The asset was only, of course, exploited and compromised due to that vulnerability and the attack activity known as the targeted attack vector. So with USM, this is the level of detail we can go to. Now previously, as we've both mentioned, myself and Neil on the call today, generally this has been the remit of quite expensive, costly stacks to implement. With AlienVault USM, we have over 350 plus devices supported out of the box. And that is basically increasing on a weekly basis. As new vendors come to the market, we support ingesting data from those data sources. Now this is known as plugins in AlienVault, and for example, today native support for all Cisco devices as well as Juniper, and a much more extensive list available on our site. In terms of those 5 capabilities we mentioned, that is exactly how we've been able to get to this level of detection. Using what is known as cross-correlation, stitching that evidence together coming from the log files, the agent on the asset telling us about the vulnerable software, and then the network intrusion detection, the tap of the network traffic, showing us who we have communicated with and the type of activity. Through building out the solution today, that first capability, asset discovery, allows you to scan for all assets in your organization. You then create your asset groups such as servers, desktops, and laptops, and move to that continuous assessment of that group. This is the vulnerability scan from AlienVault and an output of our findings as a sample. Here we have identified some critical vulnerabilities associated with the same asset group. Again, with USM deployed, had the security team or even the IT management team today and the operations team, as we see more commonly now, would have used this tool to identify the vulnerable software and, of course, gotten ahead of and preempted that attack vector. As we can see with the vulnerability output, we are offering a full CVSS base score, so anybody familiar with security stacks today would have actually looked at this previously and known this as our base scoring system. The rank for these vulnerabilities is being provided to you, and of course all information about the discovered vulnerability. So we're not only detecting these levels of threats to the organization, but we're also actually providing you and empowering you with enough knowledge to go ahead and research the incident and actually patch those assets accordingly. As you move then to our final use cases there around HIDS and NIDS, as part of deployment, our agent integrated with the platform today records all application, system, and security logs from our assets. So for the guys on the call that are used to actually getting the data into a platform, today we provide you with native support for Windows events, application, system, and security. For Linux platforms, everything from var log, for example. So finally, for the organization, of course, this means that we now have full visibility into both user behavior monitoring and, of course, all the way through to when the worst case scenario does occur, of course, that full system compromise. At the same time, on a daily basis, you will see your firewalls picking up on malicious actors, and these are known in AlienVault as indicators of compromise. So to put it all back together, our OTX and our cloud-based threat intelligence capability today allows you to connect your on-premise USM directly with the AlienVault OTX API, where we're able to browse the latest threat campaigns and share that knowledge with our end users. As Neil mentioned, we have over 40,000 plus contributors today, and some of those, of course, are also leading vendors. With OTX, then, we're sharing that knowledge, as mentioned, back down on-premise to be, of course, associated with your own internal assets, but retaining all data privately and locally. So your SIEM element here in AlienVault today, as mentioned, we offer a virtual appliance based on VMware ESXi OVF file and our physical appliance offering. So that's it from me for today, guys. We'll open up after the session now for some Q&A. So I'll pass you back over to Neil now, and basically, as mentioned, we'll start to open up the floor there for some Q&A shortly. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Barry. Hi, Neil, you there?
Yeah, sorry. There's always one time on any web-based demonstration where someone has to go on mute and talk to themselves for about a minute.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That was me then. That was me then. So there you go. So thanks, Barry. Really appreciate your time doing the demonstration. As Barry says, then that's. It's a high-level overview. It covers most of what we're at, what we're about, how the product itself looks and feels and works, and why you'd have it that way, and so on. We're open to either having some questions on this call. If the guys at AM want to just wrap it up for now, and we can take things offline, and anyone wants to engage with us separately in partnership with ANSecurity, and talk about your specific issues, any questions you have specifically, we're also happy to do that. So, Jed, do you want to host the floor and see if there's anything comes up we can try and answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So a question from Adrian asked what sort of compliance issues does AlienVault address? So I assume that's sort of out-of-the-box compliance sort of functionality?
Yes, it tends to be just the standard stuff, the PCI DSS, the HIPAA, the ISO 27001, some of the compliance around needing to, I need to look into the full details. Barry, do you know any of the specifics around that? I know it's related to some of the centralized government stuff, but your background is compliance, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, just being, all honesty, for me personally, I've gone through those PCI audits. I've also been on a SOX compliance team for a very large oil and gas company. And for us, really, the days of having to manually get templates for compliance from Windows, exporting firewall logs, and having a nice little output there. Today, that's just not practical anymore. Especially with big data and et cetera on the forefront now of today's organizations, we need to be able to automate elements to get data into a platform. That's exactly what AlienVault does for compliance. We have pre-built templates for PCI, pre-built templates for ISO in the US, if you have any US customers, and we would have HIPAA also compliance there for health industry, of course. In terms of government level, we do offer full support for GPG 13 and 14 practices. We do have that capability in AlienVault to pipe the content relevant to those compliance reports. So using AlienVault as that initial capture engine for something like a compliance project, we do have reference customers available today, such as various different airlines that have also used AlienVault USM for exactly that purpose. So that's our compliance mapping module, we call that in AlienVault. And anyone who wants to see that in a bit more detail, I could do pretty much an hour just around our compliance mapping capability, or certainly we follow up with AN to do another direct session around compliance.
Okay, brilliant. We had a question from John Roberts. So how typically, how many people would you need to manage the AlienVault product, or would, I think sort of like a lot of them, would you need a separate security team to look after it?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So traditionally speaking, we would have started our pedigree as an SOC tool. So therefore, the SOC operators themselves would have been using USM for certain capability within the organization. Now, as AlienVault progressed over the past 10 years, for example, we then became and started to automate those tasks and capture that information ourselves. So to be perfectly honest, in today's environment, we're actually providing you with the detection capability and the collection capability. Previously, of course, you would have had to been able to find that information yourself and pump it into the platform. So basically, in terms of today's environments, if you're a very large SOC opportunity, then of course AlienVault offers full training around level 1, level 2, and of course SOC management capability. And we do scale to that level of feature and functionality. At the smaller level, for the smaller organization, maybe you have the IT department, you have the IT management team in place already, and sysadmins would like to get trained up on security. This is exactly what we're also doing in AlienVault. Now, the platform itself can be put into, as we call, set and forget mode, where you're just responding to the incident itself and actually patching a server if we tell you we found a vulnerable one, for example. You can go from there all the way through to, of course, threat intelligence itself. Investigation and event is more the remit of an analyst. However, we see that the challenge today, and my customers I deal with daily, is basically they either do not have any capability at all, or that they, of course, would have previously had a contractor who has built some form of tool, and they're now well gone. So with the AlienVault USM, it really is about that capability. Now, today, most organizations in the mid-market would have, of course, just received the event from USM itself, and your action then would be for your network admin or your existing sysadmin team to simply patch the server. That's why we're giving the power back to you guys to operate the tool, and we're advising you on the remediation tasks required.
Cool, brilliant. There's a question from Adrian. How does the price compare to other SIEM products? I mean, that's probably one sort of we can answer. There's a fairly sort of short scoping process we can go through to where we can sort of provide some pricing. I mean, there's a number of options. Whether you wanted to sort of look at managed services as well, that's something we can also provide. So yeah, I mean, Adrian, if you wanted to catch up with your account manager here, then they'll be able to assist with some pricing for you.
Yeah, actually, Jed, I'll just add to that. I mean, it is open-ended. You're absolutely right. You probably need the details to get into the finer points of it, but I've found through personal experience that at times, and I'm talking about a variety from either larger or smaller scale implementations, we can be 20 to 25% of the cost of something like ArcSight or QRadar. So it's not 25% less than, it's about a fifth, a quarter or a fifth of the usual price of those kind of products. So it is pretty substantial. I mean, obviously I can't commit that that'll be 100% accurate because it depends. But what I've seen in a like for like, and this, and one particular example where we worked on an opportunity for a major broadband provider in the UK. Those guys went to ArcSight and asked for comparative pricing for us, and the difference was exactly that. We were somewhere around about a headline of about 500,000 to 600,000 on ArcSight for what they were looking to do. Then they added discounts, got it down to about $350, and our base price, recommended retail price, was about $110,000. Comparatively to this sort of 350, 400,000 with added discounts. So the difference is we're confident that it'll be such a significant discount that it makes it an extremely appealing proposition. Yeah. And obviously we've been into the strength of the technology, so it's a
hard to ignore.
For sure.
Okay. There's a question from Aaron. How is the unit license per user, per device?
Yeah, usually we go via IP addresses. It's as simple as that, really. Barry, do you want to add anything to that, or does that basically just cover it?
Yeah, it's two streams there. It's kind of a two-tier model, guys. We start with our IP addressing model, which is known as asset-based licensing. And from there, we move into performance-based licensing. And that's called a scoping exercise here with AN. And that's basically what you would be going through. So how many assets do you have? What kind of assets are they? How many sites and locations do you have? And we deploy out our architecture then and scope accordingly from there. Initially, for the smaller team, though, we can start with as little as 75 IP addresses and go all the way up then to 150 IP addresses. From there, we move into what's known as our unlimited asset license, and that's something the guys in AN can share with you there then in relation to how we distribute out our architecture from there.
Yeah, then once you sort of get up past that, then it's sort of purely based on the sort of events per second, and then it's
exactly
sized accordingly.
Exactly. Yep, that's it.
Cool. I think that's nothing else in the chat box. So yeah, no, I think that's it. I mean, yeah, anything else from anybody? Feel free to contact us, your account manager that you've spoken with, if you wanted to set up trials or sort of maybe personalised demos, anything like that. Then yeah, by all means. But no, thank you very much today, Barry and Neil. Very good.